to the New History Lecture Series in St. Bernard history and just St. Bernard people in general, and that is Dr. Christina Vella. She has done so much for the History Lecture Series, the symposium, the Boundary Historical Symposium. In fact, the last one was dedicated to her for her lifelong contribution to St. Bernard history and its people. And her contribution, by the way, goes beyond just the history part to serving students and others. Recently, I was also honored to participate in a ceremony that she won the Louisiana Book Festival Louisiana Writers Award, which is a very exclusive award, very important, and which shows that just like we think of her in St. Bernard, the state thinks of her as well. Written a number of national level histories, including on the subject of tonight's lecture, George Washington Carver, and has done a bunch of other stuff too. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Christina Vella.
Gosh, I never know how to follow those beautiful, generous words. I never know what to say afterwards. Thank you so much for coming. Curtis, thank you for inviting me. I'd like to recognize and embarrass him. We have a very eminent historian in our midst, Dr. Jack Davis, and I'm so glad that he was here for the lecture. You want to stand up, Jack? No. Jack is not as prolific as he might be. He's only written about 60 books. He makes the rest of us just awe in comparison. Well, tonight I want to talk to you, and if there's a point where I'm echoing, or you can't hear me too well, or you can't see me too well, or whatever, just stick up your hand and let me know, okay? And I'll try to, somebody will see what they can do about it. I want to talk about a man who you probably are vaguely familiar with. Normally when I tell people I wrote a book on George Washington Carver, they say, peanuts, huh? And that's, as far as our knowledge goes, that he created a number of products using peanuts and sometimes sweet potatoes. Actually, the truth is, he created over 2,000 saleable products with peanuts, sweet potatoes, weeds, red mud clay from Alabama, mud sludge, oil sludge, the detritus from manufacturing products, rubber, kudzu. You know what kudzu is? Those plants that grow in Georgia that, you can't control. I mean, every kind of nuisance product that you can imagine, he turned into something useful and saleable. And in addition to that, he was cursed with the most dramatic life any of us have lived. When I was a child, if you went to a grocery store and there were tabloids and newspapers, George Washington Carver's picture would be on the cover of every one. When I was a child, some years after he had died, he was more famous than the president. Everybody knew who he was. How come? Because, and I'll bet you many of you saw these too, they came out with hundreds of little books to inspire children about this hero, this black man who had done so much for his people and for all people. So there were all these noble little volumes, talking about what a great American he was and all of that. And so people grew up with an understanding that he was a hero. They knew nothing about him as a man. They really didn't know too much about his private life. And the surprising thing to me is that there were no really good adult biographies. There was one in 1948, there was another in 1987 that was a hatchet job, and a couple of others that were partially about Carver and partially about other topics, and that was it. So, of course, when you find somebody who's as interesting as Carver and nothing's written about him, it's just irresistible. You've got to get into those things and find out the story. What was his story? Well, he was born during the Civil War, and he was born in Missouri, which was one of those states that was basically invaded by both sides. the Confederates would come in, sometimes the regular army, sometimes just a bunch of bums who wanted to call themselves Confederates and looked at it as an opportunity to go wild because authority and law had broken down in these places that were being constantly invaded. They'd come through, they'd go on a farm, they'd terrorize everybody, they'd take the farmer and string him up and say, we're going to kill you if you don't tell us where your money's hidden. He'd give them whatever he had, they'd steal all the animals, they'd steal the slaves, and off they would go. A couple of days later, the Union people would come in, or other bandits, other rabble calling themselves Unionists, and they would do the same thing. And so this place where he was born, which was, I guess, it was very near Neosho, Missouri, which you probably don't know where that is, and the name of the major city around there escapes me just now. But it was invaded many, many times. Carver was a baby, and he was kidnapped along with his mother during one of these raids and taken to Arkansas, where the band that kidnapped him planned to sell him as a slave. Well, his owner was a man named Moses Carver, Moses and Susan Carver, and they were good white people. They had settled on this land at the time when the United States was giving away land to anybody who would grow it and improve it. And they had staked out this little farm, and they made it a terrific success, really. He had race horses, and he had, it was a producing farm. When you think about what that means, a producing farm, do you know the kind of land that these people got? It wasn't that it was infertile, it was fine land. It was woods. It was thick, thick woods. They had to clear it. They had to clear it with hand tools. And then when they planted it, unless they were lucky enough to be able to plant or to have a stream on their land, they had to go to the nearest stream and in buckets bring the water for the orchards that they planted. I mean, I can't even imagine every day's labor. It's the kind of stuff, it's the kind of hard labor that if you and I did it for one day, we would have to take a week to recover. And they did it for every day. Well, Moses Carver sent somebody after them to try to recover the mother and the baby George. And this man did trade a racehorse. He found the baby, and he traded a racehorse for the baby, but he never found the mother. So George Washington Carver grew up always trying to find out what had happened to his mother. She apparently had some other children. She certainly had a half-brother for George, who was a little bit older than he was. George was brought up by these people, the Carvers. They couldn't read and write. They were like so many people of that period in that place. They worked, they raised other people's kids. They raised about 4 of his brother's kids, and they had no children of their own. And they were apparently very kindly and very taciturn. And I dwell on them because I really do think that in the things that have been written about Carver, they give short shrift to the Carver family, to the Carvers who raised him, because they were white people. And of course, a lot of black people want to believe now that, white people had nothing good to do with black people. They were all oppressors. But, when you find out little details about Carver, for example, Moses Carver could play the fiddle, and he taught George to play the fiddle before he was 10 years old. Now, a fiddle out in the frontier is something you can't replace if a child breaks it. But he entrusted this precious instrument with which he used to play the dances every Saturday night to these little hands so that this child could learn to play the fiddle. And Susan Carver got him a blueback stone. She couldn't read it, but she got it for him, and together they tried to figure it out enough that she could teach him to read. So he's somewhere, he's not a son exactly. Although people in those days didn't treat their children, they weren't pampered children like they are now. I mean, even if you were a son, you didn't necessarily live the life of Riley. But they treated him somewhere between a son and a slave. So George is a bright, bright little boy. And he can do a lot of things that the Carvers teach him. They lived in a cabin that was, I'm not exaggerating, it was half the size of this stage. Carver, George rather, his brother, the Carver adults, and the 3 children that they took in. They lived in this little space. So you can see why he became an outdoor boy. And he started fooling with the plants, the wild plants that were on the place. He didn't know their names, and nobody else knew their names, so he made up names for them. And then he tried to see which ones belonged in families, and he made up families and family stories about them. He had a terrible stutter so that nobody could understand him. He wasn't a kid who grew up with advantages, not many, just the advantage of the Carvers loving him enough to care for him and to treat him like an adopted son. Well, by the time he's 10 years old, he can read, but he's dying for knowledge. There are no books around. The only music that he hears is if he goes to the white church and sits on the steps, he can hear the hymns and the organ, and he loves it. That's as close as he gets to music. So when he's about 10 years old, he talks to the Carvers and he says, I've got to find an education. I want to be educated. There was a school in Neosho, 10 miles away, that had just been opened up by the Freedmen's Bureau. The end of the war has come by now. And he wants to go to that school. So he, with their permission, he takes out and he walks the 10 miles to Neosho. And he comes out next door to the school where there is a family living there who have no children. She's a laundress, and she sees him sleeping on her haystack or her wood stack, and she takes him in for 3 years, and she teaches him how to iron dress shirts, how to make fancy ironing and doing laundry, which is going to hold him very, very well as he keeps going in life. Well, in 3 years, he knew everything the school had to teach him. So he hitches a ride on a wagon that's going to Kansas. It's going to push the frontier a little farther west. He goes to Kansas with some people, and when he's about 13 or 14, he works as a houseboy or cleaning out barns or cooking or washing and ironing clothes for 3 or 4 months, gets enough money, quits that, goes to school, runs out of money, goes back to work, runs out of money, goes back to school. And he's a migrant, basically. He's going from one settlement in Kansas all over the state, back and forth, wherever there's work, and he just attends whatever school he comes to, and whatever church he comes to. He's got religion. Well, as you can imagine, that desultory education takes him a very long time to finish. He finally graduates from high school when he's in his mid-20s. And now he wants to go to higher education. He has nothing. When he goes into a town, he borrows a wash tub on credit. He pays for the soap by doing some work for whoever's selling the soap. And he sets himself up with a sign, and he waits for people to bring him laundry, and that's how he survives. He makes an application to a school, and it's an art school because he's so good at it. Of course, he has no paints. He makes his paints out of boiling flowers and getting various tints, and he paints with his fingers. But he goes to this art school, and they welcome him. They have never seen a Negro before. And when he comes in, he's treated really royally and warmly. And the girls tease him, and everybody likes him, and he participates in plays that they do. He's a wonderful ham, and he just has the time of his life. But one of his teachers says, you know, you are going to have a beggarly existence as a black painter. this is not a profession for you. I want you to go to Iowa State and major in agriculture because there's a need. This is the period in America where they're really trying to have a green revolution. At that point, we're importing most of our food. It's hard to believe now when we're the exporter of food to the world. But at that time, we were importing everything. But they were on the edge of finding the answer to making this a burgeoning country. And agriculturalists were like the space scientists of today. Everybody wanted them. And he said, they're not going to let me in. He had had the experience of applying to a university where they said, oh yes, we'd love to have you. It had advertised itself as open to all races. And he thought, wow, that's for me. And he spent about a year gathering letters of recommendation and all of his documents, you know, like you do when you apply for college. And he walked 25 miles to this college, walked in the registrar's office. The registrar's face fell. I didn't even know you were a Negro. I thought you were an Indian. We're open to Indians, not black people. So in 5 minutes, the dream was shattered. So you can understand why he was reluctant to go through that again. But his art teacher said, no, don't worry, they'll let you in. He said, how do you know? My father's the head of the biology department. So there he was. He went to Iowa State. And he, again, you know, he worked hard to get there. He lived in a shed with no electricity, no running water, certainly not a toilet, no heat, nothing. He lived there with the previous tenants who were rats. But he lived there for several years. He took in laundry from the students. The few students who insulted him, he absorbed those insults, but a lot did not. A lot were fascinated by him because he was the brightest guy in every one of his classes. And he was fun. George Washington Carver had the best sense of humor and the kindliest nature I think I've ever met in a historical character. I went through, 2,000 or 3,000 of his letters. I never found one word of malice against anybody, even people who were treating him like dirt. He would always find some reason, some empathetic thing to say. And funny, he turned everything into a joke, and he loved life, and he was absolutely colorblind. White people had brought him up. White people had been kind to him. Black people were his people that he wanted to help. But he didn't care, either one. They were all people. They were all children of God to him. So he goes to Iowa State, and Iowa State then, it's the conjunction of a perfect time with a perfect person. Because Iowa State is the Harvard of agricultural colleges then. They were starting these state agricultural experiment stations, which they would put in different colleges. And the purpose of them, of course, was to do agricultural experiments. We have one at LSU. Not every college has them, but some do. Some important colleges, agricultural colleges, have these experiment stations. And there were people there who were later going to become secretaries of agriculture, several secretaries of the interior. They were going to be in Franklin Roosevelt's cabinet. They were going to rise high in the national scene. And they were all young professors starting out at Iowa State. And they took to him like gravy on rice. They loved him. He was such a hard worker. He loved the plants so much. He was so devoted and so diligent about record keeping and doing experiments. They made him the head of their experiment station. And he produced papers along with his professors while he was still an undergraduate. When he graduated, he wanted to go on to graduate school, and so they gave him this position at the head of the experiment station. He started graduate work, and he got a master's degree from Iowa State. And he made friends with all of these people. Some of them were going to run for vice president. Some of them were going to of agriculture. He had all these connections in Washington that he made no effort to exploit. They were just people who had been his teachers and became his friends. Well, he's got a niche now. He's teaching in Iowa State, and he's a happy man. Before I tell you the next step in his life, I'll go on and tell you the next step in his life. The next step was that Booker T. Washington came through on a speaking tour, heard about this man, wanted an interview with him, and offered him a job by mail. When the job offer came through, Carver said, well, it's very kind of you, but I have many job offers. I think I'm going to be happiest here at Iowa State. Well, Booker came to see him personally, and that was it. Booker T. Washington, if ever somebody had charisma, it was Booker T. He could sit down and talk to you and make you believe whatever he wanted to. He exuded charm and forcefulness and authority, and you would have just followed him anywhere for the sheer self-sacrifice of giving something to your people, to your black people. He talks to Carver, and man, Carver falls over and says, I will go with you anywhere. Yes, I'll come to Tuskegee. It doesn't matter what you pay me. Yes, I know it's going to be hard work. I want to help my people. Well, his professors at Iowa State were appalled. They said, you're going down there, you're not going to have a laboratory, you're not going to have the support that you need. You can do great things. You can do more for your people right here by your discoveries and your experiments. Don't go. He said, no, I've got to go to my people. They need me. So he went. It was a leap of faith, it really was. He goes down to Tuskegee, which at that time was this ramshackle barn where they were having classes. And he throws himself into doing everything he can to help these sharecroppers. Now, what's a sharecropper? It's different than a tenant farmer. A tenant farmer comes to you, the farm owner, and he has his own tools, and he has some knowledge. Maybe he has a wagon, maybe he even has a mule. And so he pays you a fixed rent to use your land to raise things. And he's in a little bit better off position. The sharecropper has nothing but his hands. And he comes to you, and whatever he raises, you take a portion of it. Well, the South had had this monoculture of cotton for so long. Cotton's very hard on the soil, I don't need to tell you. And so the cotton had been decreasing every year. They were getting less and less cotton, which was the only cash crop, and they were impoverished, and the owner took half of that. They didn't have enough to eat, even to eat on a farm, imagine. Now today we know that a farm in the South may be a cotton plantation or a sugar plantation, but it's also going to grow corn in order to feed the people on the farm, feed the animals. It'll probably grow some soybeans, it'll grow a lot of things. That wasn't the case then. They grew cotton right up to the doorway, even though it wasn't producing. Well, George starts out. Now, first of all, he's a new teacher, so he teaches 6 classes, 6 different classes. Those of you who are teachers have an idea what that means. In addition to that, he takes a wagon out every weekend to the outlying areas, and he goes and visits these farms, and he tries to see what their problems are and tries to help them. He has the wagon fixed up with all kinds of different things, jams and this and that he can give the farmers and talk to them. They have monthly institutes where the farmers come to them and they get all kinds of information. But in addition to all that, he sets up an experiment station at Tuskegee. Because of his Washington contacts, they give him one of the experiment stations. And he starts trying to find some crop that will put the nutrients back in the soil so they don't have to raise this bloody cotton that they can't sell. And after so much experimentation, he finds that sweet potatoes will yield more per crop than anything else, and that peanuts will do the best for the soil more than anything else. Within a year or two, that soil will be fertile again. And he teaches them how to use natural fertilizers, which is basically swamp muck and animal poop, instead of buying expensive fertilizers that they can't use. All right, now I know this is getting boring because after all, agriculture, it's not the most scintillating thing we can talk about. But what are they going to do with these peanuts? This was not an era when people ate peanuts out of little packages. George Washington Carver helped the guy who started Tom's Salted Peanuts. You remember those little glycine packages of Tom's Salted Peanuts? Well, Carver helped that man get established. Peanuts was no more a cash crop than parsley. If you raised all that much of it, how could you sell it? Well, you could sell it because he was going to invent products that used peanut oil, peanut milk, linoleum, paper, book covers, cosmetics, paints, paint thinners, building materials, highway building materials. I could go on and on from here to next week with the stuff that he came up with that you could use peanuts. If manufacturers wanted to try manufacturing this stuff, it would be cheap and it would sell and these farmers could get out of poverty. Well, in addition to peanuts, he starts doing experiments with everything. Every plant that grew that didn't seem to have a purpose, that was just a nuisance plant, he found a purpose for it. It was amazing, the stuff that was coming out of that little laboratory. I call it a laboratory. It wasn't a laboratory. It was a room with a kerosene lamp and no Bunsen burner. He had to beg for a rock grinder to take the rocks and try to see what were their chemical components. They wouldn't give him anything. He didn't have a lab. He basically had a kitchen. And he did all of this from that. Well, why wouldn't they give him a lab? What was going on there at Tuskegee? A lot. First of all, when he gets there, Booker T. Washington, who recruited him, is tremendously jealous of him. Carver at that time, is the only one with an advanced degree. He has an MA. He wanted to go for his PhD, but Booker wouldn't let him. He's jealous of him for that. The faculty snubs him because he's better educated than they are, and he is black as anthracite. They were all light-skinned blacks. All those ivory dolls wanted nothing to do with a man who is as black as your coat. So they treat him very badly, and Booker encourages it. He sets up these cabals between faculty. Booker Washington did a lot for his people, but he was one of the most repugnant characters I have come across in American history. He was just a son of a gun to everybody. He overworked people, he exploited them, he manipulated them, he carried on these little petty wars against them, especially if they were helpless and they had to stay with him and they didn't have too many other options. He was a stinker, a first-class stinker. One of the things that he did, for example, when Carver got to Tuskegee, he fell in love with a woman who was Booker T. Washington's right-hand man. She was married to this man, and they had 6 children. And her mother had just, when Carver arrived, had just burned to death. A lot of the things that are in the book are in there in order to try to adduce a sense of what it was like to be alive in that place at that time. And one of the details is that you don't realize unless you read a lot of newspapers of the period, is that people were getting burned up in open fireplaces all the time. Children were falling in. Every month you'd read about some baby who fell in the hearth and was burned alive. Well, that happened to one of this woman's children and her mother. Her mother was rocking the baby in front of the fireside, and they both caught on fire and died. So she was grieving over that, and Carver shows up, and Carver is a sensitive, sympathetic soul. He is cultured like she is. Now, do not ask me where Carver got his taste for opera and great painting and great poetry. This is a man who would have been thrown out of any opera house south of the Mason-Dixon line. This was somebody who had no money to go and buy any book of poetry and was hardly allowed in the public library if there is one. So I don't know how he gets his tremendous culture, but he is a tremendously cultured man by the time he gets to Tuskegee. So he falls in love with this woman. I won't tell you now the evidence that there is or is not for their having had an affair, because I don't want to spoil the whole book for you, and I don't want to be here till next Wednesday. But eventually, Booker T sets up a situation where her husband has a pretty flirtatious secretary, and her husband begins having an affair with the secretary, and when faculty and of course the wife ask him to move the woman, give her another position, take them out of that propinquity, he refuses, and in fact throws them together and manipulates the situation so that the wife is sent to a mental institution or a sanitarium. I'd love to tell you about this. I'll tell you about the sanitariums. This is the period when Kellogg of cornflakes, he and his brother have this sanitarium, and they promote the healthful foods that they make. And they promote all kinds of other wacko ideas, that you have to have a morning yogurt enema 3 times a day, something like that, that you can only eat certain foods which don't include meat, that you have to immerse yourself in polluted mud half the day. I mean, one thing after another. Well, you'd think only wackos would go to this place, but in fact, very prominent people went. The list of people who subscribe to this is just laughable. And they did it in Europe too. People were going in for all of these cures because medicine still was not providing relief very much of anything. And also it was kind of a rest spa. But one of the things that it boasted was electroshock therapy. In fact, they would put it to the genitals of adolescent boys to cure them of masturbation. Very good thinking, yeah, that would cure you of almost anything. Well, this was the place that he forced her to go. And that she was forced, well, it's clear from the correspondence, but the day Booker died, she left and came home. And she came home to find that her husband was in love with this other woman, was going to marry her and leave the 6 children. And she threw herself off the top of a building in Tuskegee. She loved Carver, and Carver loved her, but of course she had no intentions of breaking up her home. And she was very fragile mentally. I mean, I don't pretend she had both oars in the water, because she didn't. She was neurotic. But anyway, she killed herself. Well, that's Carver's first love affair in Tuskegee. His second was with her sister, and that lasted 6 years. I'm not going to go into the details of these love affairs. They're very interesting and very dramatic. But Carver muddles along, putting up with Booker, who keeps promising in the laboratory if only he'll do this or that or the other thing. Carver does this or that or the other thing. And then Booker says, what? A laboratory that will be used by you alone? Well, that's very selfish. Where did you get that idea? You know, just stinky stuff. But fortunately for you and me and Carver, Booker died in 1915. And then Carver really takes off. The new president appreciates him and promotes him. He doesn't spend a lot of money on him, but he doesn't hold him back. He's not jealous of him. They become very good friends. And Carver begins his good years. gradually his reputation goes. He is absolutely famous by the time he's 60. Albert Einstein gave a speech to about 2,000 people, all of them white, and he said, of the 10 greatest scientists in America today, I put George Washington Carver as number 2. And the whole group broke out in applause because they saw that he was just an amazing person. He could play any instrument you handed to him, any musical instrument, and play it beautifully. There were 3 characteristics that everybody who ever talked to Carver came back and told you about. One was that time when he was kidnapped, he had gotten whooping cough and it had damaged his vocal cords. So that he talked very much like this, like an aging soprano. He never got any lower than this. And when you hear his speeches on record, you think, can that be a man? And it is indeed Carver. So he talked with this high squeaky voice. The second thing about him was that he dressed deliberately like a bum. Whether he was going to talk to the president or a bunch of students, he patched his clothes. He wore a suit that had been given to him by his fellow graduate students when he left Iowa State to come to Tuskegee. The first 10 years, the suit was tan. The second 10 years, it was green. The third 10 years, it was kind of a grayish color, except for the patches that you put in the elbows and all over it. The suit was worn every day exclusively for 40 years before it finally disintegrated. And he said, well, you know, if people want to see my clothes, I've got suitcases full of them that people send me. I thought they wanted to see me. He was clean, but he looked like a homeless person. And everybody, I think he did it to get under Booker's skin, because Booker was the kind of person who changed his clothes 3 times a day, and he always just looked immaculate, and it drove him crazy. Booker was the kind of person who was so furious if there were not flowers on the table in the dining room, that each one of the tablecloths wasn't ironed to perfection. I bet it drove him bonkers every time he looked at Carver, because Carver was so shabby. The third thing people remembered about Carver was that he loved plants so much, he talked to them incessantly. He would walk around the campus. Oh, you little Junior, you're way there in the back. Let's put you in the front, sweetheart. Oh, that's fair. Okay. And he talked to the plants. Actually, it wasn't just plants. He talked to fish, he talked to rocks, he talked to cows, he talked to everything that he thought had an interior life. As I say, he was eccentric and just merry and funny and loving and lovable. When he was 60 and world famous, he fell passionately in love with a 23-year-old white man who was an evangelical. Now, the fact that both Carver and this man and everybody in Carver's circle were Christian fanatics only complicated this. I don't want to spoil it for you, so I'm not going to tell you what went on in that 10-year relationship. But it's a funny thing, because even though there were at least 2 biographies written about Carver before mine, and the whole evidence of this love affair was in the correspondence between them, nobody mentioned it. And I think the reason was very simple. It's deep in the correspondence. The correspondence has got about 3,000 or 4,000 letters in total. And I think they just gave up before they got to it. They figured, okay, he's famous, he's world famous, that's good enough, we can stop there. And they didn't keep reading his letters to see this juicy stuff that comes very late in life. Another thing Carver did that it bears mentioning, it's one of those things that people do and they throw themselves into it and they have results, but then somehow it gets buried under the dust of history and nobody ever hears about it. He found something before the Salk vaccine that seemed to be a treatment for polio. Now, children were being struck down by polio up until the late 1950s, like that, every day. I mean, as I was growing up, there were children who were getting polio, recovering from polio. And Carver discovered a massage that he first used with peanut oil. There were a few cases. Are you coming forward to tell me I need to hurry? Yeah, that's what she's doing. There were a few, I'm winding up. There were a few cases where people would come in on stretchers and walk out normally after a few months of treatment. But not all the cases. A lot of people would experience an improvement and then they hit a plateau, almost like a diet, you know, where there was no more improvement. And they'd eventually give it up. There were doctors who were planning to add a wing to their hospitals just to give this treatment for polio. They were so excited about it. But they never, Tuskegee claimed that it did not have the money to subject this to a real scientific trial with a control group and a group of sufferers, you know, and compare. They never did that. And so for years, Carver, in addition to all of his other duties that I've described to you, when he got finished working at 5 or 6 o'clock, whatever it was, there would be a wagon train of people coming into Tuskegee who wanted him to treat them. And he would do it until midnight. And then the next morning, he'd do a few people before he went to teach class. And as soon as classes were over, he did it again till midnight. He did maybe 7, 8 very strenuous massages a day, 7 days a week, and helped many, many people. A lot of people, it didn't seem to help. He never understood why, and he never claimed to have a cure for paralysis. The newspapers claimed it. And so people deluged him, just deluged him with mail and plead. When you read those letters written during the Depression, it will break your heart. The letters say things like, I'm 32 years old, I weigh 71 pounds. I'm desperate to get well for the sake of my baby and my husband. I'm afraid my husband's going to leave me because he just can't pay the doctor bills and it's breaking his heart. Please, I beg you, do anything you can. I will be so grateful. I'll give you whatever I have. He'd get another letter. My baby seems to be smart, but she's 7 years old and she can't hold her head up. When I talk to her, she can't talk back, but she understands with her eyes. She can roll over a little bit. She's in pain and she whines with pain all the time. Is there anything you can do to help? Can I bring her? Can we see if the massages would help? On and on it went. And it would have taken a stronger heart than Carver's to turn these people back. He never would accept a penny for lecturing, which he did constantly, or for massaging, which he did constantly. He said Tuskegee paid him, and that was enough. He didn't have to have money from people if he could help them. He was an amazing person because of his accomplishments, because of his kindness, because of his great sense of humor. He's so funny. I wish I could think of some of the funny things he said, but just cute. Because he is an example for us. I think what happened to Carver's fame, why he dried up in the 60s basically, he died in 1943, is that the public started turning to more militant examples, the Rosa Parks, the weathermen, the people who were fighters, and they kind of lost interest in somebody who seemed to them almost part of the white world. But Carver's an example of a perfect humanitarian. And I think if he were around today, he, more than any of us, with all of our goodwill, more than any of the political correctness, more than any of he could heal our divisions just by his sheer example and love for everybody. Are there any short questions you want to ask me about Carver? Good, I hate questions. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
This lady sets it all up. What we do without.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Again, another applause, a round of applause for Dr. Christina Vella. And I will say happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, all that good stuff to you, and hope to see you all in February. Thank you very much. Good night.